Good afternoon. I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Health, Environment, and Community Engagement Committee. I'm Cam Gordon. I'm chair of the committee. Today I'm joined by council members Fry, Pender, and Glidden. I know council member Andrew Johnson will be right back, but this is a quorum of the committee right here with the four of us so we can conduct the business. Nice to see everybody here. I did want to let folks know that there is overflow seating in room 319 right across the hall where they can also watch the broadcast of the committee. That might be especially relevant if you're actually here for a later item on the agenda and you don't want to be here for the first item. We do have 3 public hearings that are scheduled for today. The first is on our carry-out bags and retail establishments ordinance. The second is on restructuring annual pollution control billing fees, an ordinance amendment there. And the third is an emergency shelters ordinance, but we're going to be continuing that item further to develop the language, but we noticed the public hearing, so we're going to open that public hearing later today and take that up too. Then we also have 2 consent items on our agenda, and I'm going to take the consent items first so that we can get those out of the way. And I'll read what they are, and if any committee members want to pull something off for discussion, we can certainly do that. The first is to grant an agreement with Mississippi Watershed Management Organization for summer interns. And the second consent item is authorizing a software license agreement with Don Bailey for use of the Energy Benchmarking Management System. Do any committee members want to pull any of those off for questions or discussion? Seeing none, then I'll move both of those consent items forward. All those in favor, please say aye. 4 and 5. The consent items. Are we good? Okay. All those in favor of those say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Any abstentions? Those motions carry then. Then we'll go back to our first item on the agenda, which is the Bring Your Own Bag ordinance. This is amending Title 11, Chapter 225 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances relating to health and sanitation. Before we open the public hearing, we're going to have a presentation. And our presenter today is Mr. Robin Garwood, who's policy aide for the Ward 2 office. Welcome.
Thank you. Chair Gordon, committee members, as Cam said, I'm Robin Garwood. I will be giving the staff presentation on the Bring Your Own Bag ordinance. So why are we looking to address carry-out bags? There are 4 major reasons that we're doing this. 3 of them, the first 3 here, are what you might call downstream impacts. The impacts of litter, waste, impacts on recycling facilities. And then the 4th is what you might call upstream environmental impacts that come from carry-out bags. So going through these one at a time, all of these pictures were taken in Minneapolis by Minneapolis residents over the last month and a half, as were these. If you want to see more, we have quite a collection with the hashtag #TumbleBag. You can find them yourself. Plastic bags are all over the place in Minneapolis, and once they're in the environment, unless somebody picks them up, they never actually go away. They just become smaller and smaller pieces of plastic. In a recent cleanup of the Mississippi River, 1 mile of the Mississippi yielded 5 tons of trash in just over 2.5 hours. This is a nationwide problem. We have an estimated 50 to 80 million plastic bags that ended up as litter in the U.S. Back in 2002. They're also a significant portion of our waste stream. I don't know if everybody made it to the Bagnado exhibit at the Eco Experience building at the State Fair this last year, but the Bagnado represented the number of plastic bags Minnesotans throw away per day. Altogether, we throw away 87,000 tons of plastic bags in a year. And here in Minneapolis, most of those plastic bags end up in the garbage burner. And when you burn plastic, you end up creating all kinds of negative air quality impacts, VOCs, dioxins. So that makes this not just a waste issue, but an air quality issue and an environmental justice issue because, of course, that plume doesn't hit everywhere equally. It comes down in certain communities more than others. A very small percentage of the standard HDPE or high-density polyethylene bags that you get at the checkout line are ever recycled. You might hear from industry that it's a larger number than this, but that's because it's sort of a grouping together of a lot of different types of films, but the stuff that's made of HDPE, that's the standard thing that you get at the checkout line, less than 5% is recycled. By contrast, almost half of paper bags are recycled. We also know from case studies, including one that the Community Environmental Advisory Commission did, that when you address carry-out bags via a local ordinance, it does have an impact on waste reduction. They found that when they did a waste sort before they adopted their plastic bag ban, and then they did one afterwards, that they reduced the volume of plastic bags by 58% or 418 tons. And the Solid Waste Planning and Program Management Director, Timothy Kroll, also put a little anecdote in his email that single-use grocery bags are now as rare as Packers jerseys at a Vikings game. And I don't think that he was talking about when we're playing Green Bay. Plastic bags also have a pernicious impact on our recycling facilities. They wrap themselves around the single sort machines and have to be cut off by hand. When they are cut off by hand, our understanding is that they become part of the residuals, so they are not recycled. They end up being thrown away. So that's the downstream impacts of bags. Bags also have an upstream impact, and that's where actually paper bags look worse. So all bags require energy and create waste, cause air and water pollution when they are manufactured. Paper bags actually create more of that upstream impact, 64 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions and 31 pounds of water pollution per 10,000 uses. The uses is not a number of bags, it's a number of times bags get used, so it's a little bit less than 10,000 bags. Whereas plastic carryout bags create 18 pounds of GHGs and 2 pounds of water pollution. So you can see that though plastic bags are very problematic on the back end, paper bags are actually worse at the front end. So we've all been asked the question, paper or plastic, and of course, it's a trick question because the answer is neither. We should be bringing our own. And that's what this ordinance seeks to do. It seeks to incentivize Minneapolis consumers to bring our own bags. The proposal has two basic parts. On plastic bags, we would prohibit the provision of plastic carryout bags at the sort of checkout counter, the end of the buying something process, with a set of exemptions. These exemptions include plastic bags that are specifically designed to be reusable, that are about twice as thick as the standard bag that you get, or 4 mils. Produce bags and other bags that come into direct contact with food. Specialized bags like for dry cleaning, newspapers, door hanger bags, that kind of thing, and bags used for protecting the public health in the provision of carry-out food. The proposal for paper and compostable plastic and reusable bags is to give retailers two options, essentially. The first would be to charge consumers 5 cents per bag. They would not be compelled by this ordinance to charge that fee of consumers who are on SNAP, EBT, WIC, any of the food assistance programs in Minnesota, or they could opt to give their consumers a credit of 10 cents per reusable bag they bring with them. This is something where Minneapolis is actually not out in front on this. A lot of other communities in the United States have taken action on carryout bags. Over 160 cities. The entire state of Hawaii has banned the use of carry-out plastic bags. And also many countries around the world have taken this action. So Kenya, Rwanda, you can read it yourself, up to and including China. Just to give you an idea of the geographic scope of where those communities are in the U.S., this is a map of all of the cities that have taken an action on carry-out bags. In terms of implementation and enforcement of this ordinance, we have proposed the effective date for Earth Day of next year, April 22nd. This is part of a broader discussion that we're having about waste, and it's part of this zero waste policy plan initiative that the council has authorized and the mayor's office is working on. Because that process, we hope, is going to create some new ways of addressing issues like this, we have authorized multiple departments to enforce this ordinance, including the Solid Waste and Recycling Division of Public Works, the Licensing and Consumer Services Division of CPED, the Health Department and Regulatory Services, and Councilmember Gordon has a staff direction that he will be moving with today's action for those 4 departments to come back to this committee at the end of next January, no later than the end of next January, with some recommendations for implementation and enforcement. We have done considerable community engagement on this concept. In fact, it started with engaging our Community Environmental Advisory Commission. Councilmember Gordon asked them to do some research into best practices from other cities around the country and come up with a set of recommendations. And this ordinance is based on those recommendations that we received from SEAC. We've also had a lot of conversations with businesses about this. So we've met with the licensing department's business advisory group a couple of times last year and this year. We've met with the plastic bag, paper bag, and grocery industry lobbyists. We have shared the draft ordinance in early January of this year and had a specific stakeholder meeting for small business owners who speak Somali or Spanish. As well, we've heard from the health department that they've sent this out through their normal channels to the folks that they inspect. We have a large and growing list of organizations who have supported this idea. You can read them for yourselves, but we also, I think, have a lot of folks here to speak in favor of this today. So with that said, I'll stand for questions. I'll also note that we have folks from the relevant city departments here if there are specific questions about their work in terms of this.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that report. I think we may have a question from Councilmember Bender. And you know, I think I didn't actually introduce our special guests yet either. So maybe just before you...
I can do that.
Okay, why don't you introduce them for me?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, so before I ask my question, just wanted to thank the 4th grade class that we have with us from Whittier Elementary School. Thank you so much for coming here today, kids, and we were welcome back at City Hall anytime. For Mr. Garwood, I wanted to go back to the question, the slide about exemptions.
Sure.
And I wondered if you could, oops, sorry, maybe it was, yes,
This one?
Yeah. Could you talk more about the fees and the credit piece, and what is the intended purpose of that, and how did you arrive at these amounts? And then, right, so I guess that covers it.
Sure. So the point, again, is to incentivize consumers in Minneapolis to bring their own bags with them. We definitely want to address all of the effects that we're having from paper or from plastic bags, but we don't necessarily just want to push consumers to paper because, again, they have those life cycle impacts on the upfront side. So the idea is to have this pass-through fee that would be kept by the retailer of 5 cents. That would be just enough, was the hope, to get consumers to think, do I really, I have to pay that fee if I want that bag. Do I really want that bag? Maybe I should bring my own with me instead. This number actually came from the Community Environmental Advisory Commission. It was their recommendation. We have also heard that there are some retail establishments that are currently offering this 10-cent credit. I believe Whole Foods does that. A lot of the co-ops do that. They decided that was their way of trying to get consumers to change behavior. And so after some conversation with them, some conversation between the co-authors, it was decided to allow them to have that option as well.
Maybe I'll just note, because this is actually an issue that myself and the other co-author discussed quite a bit about these 2 alternatives. We also heard from some retail establishments that they seem to prefer this rather than having to collect the fee. Also, there was a sense that if a retailer wanted to bear more of the costs or more of the burden and not pass that on to customers, this would give them an alternative to do that. There were concerns that, though from others, and this credit for the reusable bag was not part of the original recommendation from SEAC, and there was a concern that the 5-cent fee is more of an incentive actually for people to make a change in their shopping habits, but this would give at least some flexibility and some discretion for the retailer. And I see another question from Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Garwood. Given that the upfront costs to the environment for paper are several times that of plastic, how can we make sure that we're simply not trading Peter for Paul, and that the ultimate output ends up being greater than before the ban?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Fry, I think Seattle and other places that have enacted policies like this provide us with a roadmap of what actually does end up happening.
Right.
They have seen waste reduction of the plastic bags in the waste stream. Again, everything has an environmental impact, but a paper bag that ends up within the litter stream out in the environment at some point will become something that's bioavailable, something that's just part of the environment again. A plastic bag that gets loose out into one of our water bodies and evades the folks doing the great sort of Earth Day cleanups, it is always going to be there. That plastic is always going to be there. And we've heard from folks that this is a great and growing problem. Plastic bags is a portion of that problem. It's not the full thing, but we know now that there's about as much plastic in the oceans as fish. It's something that we have to address.
So there's absolutely no argument on the back end at all. I agree with you. Obviously, paper is compostable. It does not add to the environmental problems the plastic does on the back end. However, on the front end was my question. And so how are we certain that we're not creating more of an environmental negative on the front end? Do we have statistics from that, from Seattle and from some of the other cities?
Through the chair, council member, I don't have those statistics in front of me right now. I think this goes to why it is as important as it is to find a way to disincentivize paper bags as well, to actually really try to drive folks towards using our own bags, trying to change our habits, build new habits so that when we come to a place and we want to buy something, we're already prepared with something to take it away with us.
Yeah.
And so that's
sense.
I mean, basically you're speaking to why the fee and the incentive, the credit is as important as it is as a piece of this ordinance. Because we really don't want to drive people from plastic to paper. We want to drive people from both to bringing their own bags.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I'm just thinking about what are the other externalities that could possibly be associated with the change. And have you done any research also with just multiple uses? I presently use plastic bags for cat litter. Following, you try and limit your use in the actual grocery store, but for those that you do take home, you try and have multiple uses so that you're expanding the life. Are there any statistics from some of those other cities showing like an uptick in trash bag sales, given that there's no mechanism to get the Lund's grocery bag?
So I think that's where the Seattle experience is instructive. They actually, when they did that waste sort, it was for all plastic bags in their waste stream. What they've found is that it actually reduced the total amount of plastic bag in the waste stream.
That's helpful.
Councilmember Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted a little bit more on kind of just a couple big picture things. One is, I think from your earlier slides, talked about the large number of cities that have taken some kind of an action, but as I understand it, there's a lot of different varieties of the action, and you kind of refer to the fact that some cities have bans and some cities use a fee methodology for trying to change behavior. So I'd like a little bit more on why this methodology was chosen with the ban on the plastic instead of a fee-based approach. So wanted a little on everything or whatever. So just a little bit more on that. And then I also wanted you to speak a little bit more to the exemptions. So there's, kind of quite a few exemptions that are listed, many that are there because of bags that would touch food type items of some sort, or be there because of a moisture type issue, or protecting, I think there was one that was protecting fine paper, things like this. And so if you could maybe talk a little bit more about how that list was put together and what you think will be the impact, knowing that you've got quite a few exemptions in here.
Sure. Through the chair, Councilmember Glidden, to your first question about the other jurisdictions and how the particular proposal was arrived at, that's actually something that I think the SEAC recommendation document, which was linked to today's agenda, could help answer. They did a lot of research into the effectiveness of the various policies in different cities. So they looked a lot at the Washington D.C. model, which is a fee on both. They looked at the Seattle model, which is a ban on plastic and a fee on paper. We asked SEAC to look at this issue without any kind of prejudgment about where we were hoping to end up, and the recommendations that we received back from them were to do the ban on plastic and the fee on paper. And again, they actually lay out their rationale fairly well in that document that they provided to us and that we've linked to the agenda. On the exemptions question, some of this was definitely in their recommendations, and then some of it came from our conversations with city staff. So, for instance, the bags used for takeout food, that's something that we heard from the health department that was pretty important to them, that we have the capacity for people to continue to provide those because of the sort of disease problems that you can end up with. I would say that it's fairly common for these kinds of ordinances to exempt certain classes and types of plastic bags based on those particular uses essentially it's will there be something that is damaged that comes from not having this bag that we can really expect in an ongoing way. So that's sort of the purpose of the newspaper bag, for instance, is to make it so that the newspaper isn't unreadable by the time you get it out. Again, a lot of these exemptions also came from the SEAC recommendations, so that would be a document to review.
And I'll just note that some of the exemptions also came up through the discussions that we had with businesses. Once we sent out the ordinance to businesses, there were a number of business associations that wanted some conversations and some meetings, and we had those. And so some of it was fine-tuning the ordinance to try to address some of those needs. You mentioned the fine art paper, and that was definitely something that came up. It's something that they don't really package when they're selling it. People buy a limited number of sheets, and we decided to make an exemption there to kind of make things easier. We also heard at some of the meetings, though, that maybe there were too many exemptions, and some people were concerned, and they were looking forward to, in the future, maybe reviewing those exemptions as time goes by.
Okay.
And
just one more question. I just want to double check, because I have this letter. Is there something different than this one-page letter? Because you kind of referred to a lot of things that SEAC helped you work through.
Through the chair, Councilmember Glidden, yes. That's the SEAC communication about the ordinance and about their support for the ordinance. They actually also gave us their set of recommendations, and I believe it's linked to the agenda for today's meeting.
I can also send you those two documents. There's one report, and then there was an appendices to it. And I know Andrew was here from SEAC too, and he could maybe speak to those issues also if he wanted to. Somebody from SEAC, maybe Anna. Well, there might be some specific questions about the SEAC recommendations, and so I just wanted my colleagues to know that you're here, and if you want them to specifically answer about that, they're available to do that. Okay, we've got a couple more questioners, and I know we have lots of people eager to get started on the public hearing too, so I'll try not to talk too much between every question. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was curious on a couple of things with what Austin experienced. I know they recently got a report back to their Zero Waste Committee, I believe, 2 years after their bag ban was implemented, and they found what they said was mixed success because they saw the number of HDPE bags drastically reduced, but the number of PP woven bags, the polypropylene, I believe is the term, I could be wrong on the term, but increased and actually offset the number of HDPE bags being reduced. Is there any concern about that here? And then generally just on the environmental footprint issue, have we tried to quantify, especially, I know reusable bags in the St. Louis Park study, they showed if HDPE bags are used at a 40% rate, which I think is probably fair to expect. I know I use all of mine for trash liners, that you'd have to reuse a cotton bag 173 times in order to offset the environmental costs. When we factor everything here in terms of retailers who are going to be giving away paper bags as long as they implement this incentive program, and those being 4 times more environmentally costly than plastic bags, when we account for what we've seen in Austin in terms of the increase of polypropylene bags in the waste stream offsetting the HDPE bags, and then the environmental cost of cotton in terms of the energy consumption. How do we feel our environmental footprint is actually going to grow, and by how much more? And obviously that then seems to me to be a question of, for this committee, the trade-off between litter and environmental footprint, and that perhaps it's worth it, or it could be potentially to increase the environmental footprint in order to reduce litter would seem to be the issue that we're wrestling with. Could you respond to that?
Sure. Through the chair, council member. Actually, we had a very good suggestion from our solid waste and recycling staff. If you turn to 225.910, the definition section of the definition of reusable bag. Prior to this, we had mostly just said that we were going to exempt bags over 4 mils in thickness. One of the things that Austin has definitely shown us is that some of the retailers will just go above whatever that thickness limit is and just use a thicker plastic bag. This has also been an issue in Chicago, where I believe their limit is actually lower than 4 mils, so it was even easier for retailers to just give people a slightly thicker bag. What we heard from solid waste and recycling was actually this great idea about defining reusable bag as something that is designed for multiple uses. It's actually number 2 there under reusable bag is specifically designed and manufactured for multiple reuses over a period of time and a minimum lifetime use of 75 uses. So that's one of the ways that we've tried to get away from the Austin problem. I think that we have definitely heard from folks, especially the plastic bag lobby, that reusable bags are actually significantly worse than the disposable plastic bags. I personally don't buy it. I don't think that we're finding large numbers of reusable bags out in the litter stream. I also think that it's entirely possible for people to, over the lifetime of a bag, use it more than the 175 times if it is actually designed to be used that way. I know that I myself, use the same bag that has my bike lock and all my other stuff in it for most of the shopping that I do. I just put everything in that bag. I've probably used it 400, 500 times now. So I think it's entirely possible to actually shift behavior in a more environmentally friendly direction. Will this absolutely, without question, have no impact on getting people to take more paper bags? I don't think that anybody can say that, but I do think that on balance it does pencil out in a more environmentally friendly direction.
Thank you. And I didn't note earlier that we've been joined by Councilmember Kano, and also Councilmember Borsami's as co-author of this ordinance is also in the meeting. And Councilmember Kano has a question, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's more of a comment as I'm noticing our conversations here and reflecting on my own cultural upbringing as it relates to the environment and some of these issues. So first, I want to acknowledge that we do have a letter of support for this ban from the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors Group, and the City of Minneapolis has a special relationship with that group in terms of supporting and uplifting the voices of American Indian people in Minneapolis. And as the representative for the largest concentration of American Indian families in the city, I'm very proud to see this letter. And I was an early supporter of the ban on plastic bags publicly months ago. I still am 100% behind this initiative today. I did want to say that as we move forward, I see here we have a staff direction that we'll probably likely talk about in a little bit regarding our staff coming back to us with ideas about implementation and sort of the programming and how we're going to do this. I would love to see a cultural component to that. And I speak about that because growing up in a Mexican family and being Mexican, we always had reusable bags that we would use to take to the grocery stores. And it's a common practice in small towns in Mexico all over the place. It's an ancestral tradition of carrying things. We've been carrying things for a long time, way before plastic bags were even invented. So I think sometimes we make our life a little bit more difficult than it actually has to be. And so I'm proud to be supporting this plastic bag ban. I hope we can take take the initiative today and move it forward. And I also met with staff from Little Earth last week and from and students at Center School, both in the 9th Ward. And I know some of those folks are here today, and they're also very supportive of the ban on plastic bags. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, you know, those voices are being heard today, and we're happy that you're here. And I'm happy to be supporting this initiative.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any more questions. So thank you very much for the presentation, and I'm sure you'll be available later if needed. I'm going to open the public hearing now, and trying to limit discussion to 3 minutes each. We have a timer over there. Usually people can cover most of their points in about 2 minutes, and so by 3 minutes they've probably said everything. So we'll have the timer up there. If you need to go a little bit further, that's fine, but I might start asking you to wrap it up or cut things off. I did ask somebody from the MPCA to come today and speak, and I think Madeline is here, so if you can come up, and if you think 3 minutes isn't quite enough, we can give you a little more time if you want, because I asked you to come in and speak.
That would be great. It
Welcome.
might take just a moment or two, but beyond 3 minutes.
Okay, so maybe we won't start the timer right off the bat, and we'll do that for the next. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks very much. Councilmember Gordon, Chair, and council members, thanks very much. My name is Madeline Chochi, and I'm here today representing the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, where I work as a waste and pollution prevention specialist, developing research and programs and policy. The MPCA recently released a white paper that is directly relevant to this discussion that you're having, titled Product Bans and Restrictions, a Guide for Local Policymakers. It was created in part because the MPCA was getting questions from cities in Minnesota in terms of guidance about how to and whether to enact this kind of ordinance. The white paper is now available online. You can just Google MPCA product bans, and my comments today are largely taken from that paper. I welcome everybody to review it prior to enacting the final ordinance, and I'm happy beyond this hearing to offer any answers to questions that I can. So I want to share first some of what we learned in writing that paper, and I'll start basically where we ended. One of the things we concluded in doing the research was that the key to good policy making in this arena is to ensure that the desired public outcomes, and you've clearly defined your purpose in your proposal, actually result from the enacted policy, the way that it's written. And in the case of plastic bags, it seems very simple, but it has proven actually quite difficult to match the outcomes with the policy across the country. Many have passed, as you know, and some have been repealed. Very few have been evaluated. Recently, the city of St. Louis Park went through a very rigorous consideration of such a policy and decided to table it. I want to make clear that the PCA does not have a stance on this particular policy or whether you should or should not pass a policy. However, because we were asked for guidance from several communities, we did this research and came to this recommendation that what we think would provide a really solid policy approach would be to emphasize reuse, as this policy does, beyond the single-use bags, and doing that through a fee on both paper and plastic bags, in part because of the life cycle impacts of both of those single-use bags. So there's no suggestion, if a fee is put on both types of bags, there's no suggestion that one is better or worse for the environment. We know that paper does have a larger footprint. That is clear. But a fee on both conveys that information that both are poor for the environment. This type of approach, while incentivizing reuse overall, also still allows citizens the chance to get a plastic or a paper bag based on which they will reuse or recycle most readily. And I think that's an important piece, because if I asked people in this room how they used plastic or paper bags in their lives, people would all have a different way that they use them. Many people would be using them as trash bin liners or pet waste collectors. Other people have reasons that they prefer having paper bags because they reuse those. Human behavior is tricky. And so it's hard to predict how they're going to use them. We also highly recommend that the ordinance include specifications in the ordinance language for evaluation and reporting. Because it's been hard for communities to get information about whether their ordinances have actually had the impacts they hope it would, we think it's really important at the outset to describe what kind of reporting you might need. Do you need to make plans to look at litter to see if it's really gone down, and if so, by how much? Do you need to talk to retailers and get reporting to find out if paper bag use is up or it's down, or reusable bag use and how much it's increased? These would also allow you to start to look at the life cycle impacts of the ordinance. So we think it's important to specify that up front. So a couple of points have already been raised today, and I appreciate the intense conversation that you're having about this. Mr. Garwood brought up already the life cycle impacts of both paper and plastic, and that it is clear from the LCAs that paper has a much larger footprint than plastic. Paper is more intensive to produce, takes more material, more energy, and ultimately more fossil fuels. It's counterintuitive, but it does seem to be true. We've seen it over and over in several studies. The proposal that is been drafted here seems to allow for paper bags to be provided for free to customers as long as the retailer is offering a 10-cent rebate on reusable bags. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay. Again, it's been mentioned already, but it has been found repeatedly that fees are a better incentive for behavior change than incentives. People, humans, psychologically respond to the fees as a bigger driver, which is one of the reasons why the PCA's recommended policy is to put a fee on both kinds of bags. As written, it seems like quite possible that what would happen here would be an increase in paper bags because they could be offered for free, whereas plastic bags would be banned. So it seems like it would be a pretty easy choice in the store if you need a bag. If it were the case that the paper bags were used over the plastic, that would be a net life cycle impact-wise, that would be a net increase in life cycle impacts, not a decrease as the goal of the ordinance suggests. In Portland, where they banned plastic bags and allowed paper, they saw a 300% increase in reusable bags, which was great, and a 500% increase in paper bags. Right. Placing the emphasis on reuse is really, really important. And again, one of the reasons that we recommend the approach that we do is because of the opening for people to use the bags as they reuse the bags as they can. So the reuse, this is a quote from one of the environmental studies that we accessed. It's a government study. It's not an industry-sponsored study in any way. The reuse of conventional and other lightweight carrier bags for shopping and or as bin liners, so the reuse of these as shopping bags or bin liners is pivotal to their environmental performance. And reuse as bin liners, trash can liners, produces greater benefits than recycling bags. So the reuse, that's why it's reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Because the reuse has the larger impacts, right? So that reuse of a single plastic bag cuts its impact in half. And you would want to do everything you can to allow that reuse to happen, I think. Because otherwise it's quite possible that people will be out needing to buy new trash bags for their bin liners if they can't access a plastic bag. There is some evidence that that's what happened in Ireland. So those new trash bags, they need to be manufactured. They tend to be thicker plastic. They tend to be more plastic. So that would just be something to be watching out for as a possible unintended consequence. It's already been mentioned that in Austin, Texas, they did do a little bit of evaluation, and they found that they pound for pound ended up with as many plastic bags in their recycling facilities as they had before. So again, one of the purposes that is put forth in this proposed ordinance is to help the facilities, the recycling